Welcome back to Timeless Wisdom, where we uncover those treasures of the Quran and really look at how they apply to our lives today. So today, we're diving into a topic that's just as relevant now as it was 1400 years ago.
Right.
Hypocrisy.
Absolutely.
And it's something I think we can all relate to in some way, right?
So sure.
That feeling of maybe not quite living up to our own ideals or saying one thing and doing another.
That gap between our actions and our words.
Exactly.
It's something I think we've all struggled with at some point.
Absolutely.
And what's fascinating is that the Quran doesn't just mention hypocrisy in passing.
Right.
It dedicates a significant portion of Surah Al-Baqarah to this topic, specifically verses 8 and 9.
Interesting.
And that emphasis really highlights just how detrimental hypocrisy can be to individuals and to society as a whole.
So let's unpack this a little bit.
Sure.
First, can you give us a little context?
Oh, of course.
What's going on in this part of the Quran?
Well, in the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, the Quran outlines 3 categories of people: those who believe, those who disbelieve,
Got it.
and then those who fall somewhere in between the hypocrites.
So this is where verses 8 and 9 come in.
Exactly. These verses get to the heart of what hypocrisy really is. It's not just about making mistakes or having moments of weakness.
Right.
It's about outwardly proclaiming faith while inwardly concealing disbelief. It's about a fundamental misalignment between what you say and what you truly believe.
So it's almost like living a double life.
Yes, and the Quran makes it clear that this kind of deception is incredibly harmful. You see, unlike disbelievers, whose opposition is clear, hypocrites operate from within the community,
Right.
sowing seeds of doubt and mistrust.
Wow.
They erode the very foundation of a society built on sincerity and authenticity.
It's like termites in the foundation of a house. You might not see the damage at first, but it can eventually cause the whole structure to collapse.
That's a great analogy. And the Quran doesn't just tell us what hypocrisy is, it also gives us insight into the inner turmoil of a hypocrite.
Right.
Verse 41.2021 paints a very vivid picture of the day of judgment, where the hypocrite's own body parts, their ears, their eyes, even their skin testify against them.
Wow, that's a powerful image. It really speaks to the idea that we can't hide our true selves from God no matter how hard we try.
Exactly, and this connects to a really important point: God's all-knowing nature.
Right.
In verse 20.7, the Quran reminds us that though you speak out loud, He knows your secrets and what is even more concealed. So even if a hypocrite manages to fool others, they can never deceive God.
So in a way, they're only deceiving themselves.
Precisely, and that self-deception creates a lot of internal conflict.
I can see that.
Just imagine the constant fear of exposure,
Right.
the pressure of maintaining this facade. It's a recipe for anxiety and unhappiness.
That makes sense. It's like how modern psychology talks about cognitive dissonance. The discomfort we feel when our actions don't align with our beliefs.
Right.
It seems like the Quran was addressing this concept centuries ago.
That's a really interesting observation, and it highlights how the Quran's wisdom is truly timeless.
Right.
It speaks to both our spiritual and psychological well-being.
So if hypocrisy is so harmful, what can we do to avoid falling into that trap?
That's a great question.
Are there any signs we can look for in ourselves to make sure we're being authentic?
That's a great question, and one we'll explore in more detail in the next part of our deep dive. But for now, I think the most important thing is to simply be aware of the possibility of hypocrisy within ourselves, to cultivate a habit of self-reflection and ask ourselves honestly, are my actions truly reflecting my beliefs?
Great question to ponder.
Absolutely. One of the things that really strikes me about hypocrisy is just how subtle it can be.
Right.
It's not always about some grand act of deception, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the little things, the everyday compromises we make that slowly chip away at our integrity.
That's a really good point. We can get so caught up in the hustle and bustle of life that we lose sight of those core values that should be guiding our action.
Exactly. And that's why self-awareness is so crucial. The Quran constantly encourages us to examine our intentions, to really ask ourselves why we're doing what we're doing.
So it's not enough to just go through the motions.
No.
We have to be mindful of the motivations behind our actions.
Absolutely. In fact, there's a very powerful hadith where the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, actions are according to intentions, and everyone will get what they intended.
Wow, that's profound. So even if an action looks good on the surface, if the intention behind it isn't pure, it doesn't hold the same weight.
Exactly. And conversely,
Interesting.
even a seemingly small act, if done with sincerity and for the sake of God, can have immense value.
So how can we cultivate that sincerity? How do we make sure our intentions are pure?
Well, one practical step is to constantly remind ourselves of God's presence.
Okay.
To remember that he sees everything,
Right.
even the secrets of our hearts.
Wow.
This awareness can be a powerful motivator to act with sincerity.
It's like having an accountability partner who's always with you.
Yes. And another important step is to check our ego at the door. So much of hypocrisy stems from a desire to impress others, to seek validation and praise.
Right.
But true sincerity is about doing what's right, regardless of who's watching or what recognition we might receive.
That's so true. It's easy to get caught up in wanting to look good in front of others, but ultimately it's our relationship with God that matters most.
Exactly. And the Quran offers beautiful examples of how to live with sincerity and humility. For instance, verse 25.63 describes the true servants of the Most Merciful as those who walk upon the earth easily, and when the ignorant address them harshly, they say words of peace.
So it's about responding to negativity with grace and composure, even when it's difficult.
Precisely. And that kind of humility is a hallmark of true sincerity.
It's interesting because a lot of what we're talking about here aligns with what modern psychology says about well-being.
Right.
Studies show that people who are authentic and live in accordance with their values tend to be happier and more fulfilled.
That's a great point. It really shows how the Quran's teachings are not just about our spiritual well-being.
Right.
They also have a profound impact on our psychological health.
There's this beautiful harmony between faith and science.
Exactly. And that harmony is a testament to the timeless wisdom of the Quran. It's a guidebook for all aspects of our lives.
So we've talked about the importance of self-awareness, checking our ego, and remembering God's presence. Are there any other practical steps we can take to cultivate sincerity in our daily lives?
Yes, absolutely. And that's something we'll delve into further in the next part of our discussion.
Great.
We'll explore specific areas of life where sincerity is especially important and talk about practical tips for putting these principles into action.
So we've talked about a lot of things, right? We've talked about the dangers of hypocrisy,
Right.
the importance of making sure our inner beliefs align with our outward actions,
Absolutely.
and some of those practical steps we can take for cultivating sincerity. But how do we know if we're actually making progress? Are there any signs we can look for in ourselves to gauge how sincere we really are?
That's a really important question. It's easy to fall into that trap of self-deception,
Right.
convincing ourselves that our intentions are pure even when they might not be.
Exactly.
But the Quran offers some valuable guidance on recognizing true sincerity.
So what are some of those signs? What should we be looking for?
Well, one of the most important indicators is consistency. Sincere actions aren't fleeting or driven by whims.
Right.
They stem from a deeply rooted commitment to righteousness. It's about integrating those principles into our daily lives, consistently striving to do what's right, even when it's difficult.
So it's not just about grand gestures or the occasional acts of kindness.
No.
It's about making those right choices consistently day in and day out.
Exactly. And that consistency should extend to all areas of our lives.
Right.
Our relationships, our work, our financial dealings.
Everything. Okay.
For example, verse 17.35 emphasizes the importance of fairness and honesty in all our transactions. Give full measure when you measure and weigh with an even balance. That is the best way and best in result.
So it's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Precisely. And another sign of sincerity is humility.
Okay.
A truly sincere person doesn't seek recognition or praise for their actions.
Right.
They do good for the sake of God, not for personal gain or social validation.
It's like doing good deeds in secret without any desire for fanfare.
Exactly. And that humility is reflected in our interactions with others, especially when we're faced with negativity. Remember how the Quran describes the true servants of the Most Merciful, who walk upon the earth easily, and when the ignorant address them harshly, they say words of peace.
Yeah, so even when we're treated poorly, we should respond with kindness and patience.
Yes, because that's a sign of true inner strength and sincerity. It's about rising above the pettiness and focusing on what truly matters.
It's amazing how these teachings are just as relevant today as they were centuries ago.
Right.
It seems like human nature hasn't really changed that much.
You're absolutely right. The Quran's wisdom is timeless because it addresses those fundamental aspects of the human condition that are always present regardless of the time period or cultural context.
So to wrap things up, what's the key takeaway you want listeners to walk away with today?
I think the most important message is that sincerity is a journey, not a destination. It's something we have to cultivate and nurture constantly.
Right.
And it's not always easy, We'll make mistakes, we'll fall short, but the key is to keep striving, keep reflecting, and keep turning back to God for guidance.
That's a beautiful reminder, and it's something we can all work on,
Absolutely.
regardless of where we are in our spiritual path.
For sure.
This has been such an insightful conversation. Really appreciate your time today.
It's been my pleasure.
It's a reminder that sincerity is not just a virtue. It's really a foundation for a fulfilling and meaningful life. And it's about aligning our inner and outer selves,
Right.
striving for that consistency in our actions, and seeking God's guidance every step of the way.
Beautifully said.
Thanks for joining us today on Timeless Wisdom. Check out our channel, The Broke Entrepreneur. The Quran's wisdom is timeless. Apply it today.